reasons that finally led me to pursue a doctoral degree was that, first and foremost, was that I wanted to simply break away from the monotony of my work routine and immerse myself in a challenging and intellectually stimulating environment. I relish the thought of being intellectually challenged and knowing the rigorous demands of a PhD program will not only push me to the limits, but also will help me grow. But I should say, this entire process was an amazing journey and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But what was surprising and interesting to me was that it turned out to be a huge stress reliever. And then the second reason, I would say, it was my eagerness to contribute to the world of higher education and in particular to academic development and make a meaningful impact in the field. Third, and I think most important was that I was looking to ways to give back to the NUS community, which I've been part of for over 2 decades now, by using the new knowledge and insights gained to enhance my own work and those of my team members so that we can together make a positive impact on the many colleagues that we serve. My research sought to understand the ways in which educational beliefs and ideologies influence the conceptualization and enactment of teaching, learning, and assessment practices, and the factors and structures that condition academic subjectivities in a hybrid graded, gradeless education context, which is very unique to NUS. Right? Using social practice theory, I took a processual, relational, interactive construction of the social order to illuminate the enactment of practices of teaching, learning, and assessment, and the conditioning towards grades and gradelessness in the 9 course sites that I observed as part of my study. The first significant finding is that there is no simple binary between graded and gradeless, and neither is superior in all circumstances. My data and analysis revealed a complex and nuanced picture in which many contextual conditioning factors have an impact on students' and teachers' understandings and practices. Be it graded or gradeless, students in the course sites demonstrated a pursuit of learning as an intellectual pursuit. They participated very determinedly in learning and assessment practices, consistently giving their best, wanting to succeed, and they participated, with a sense of self and purpose, wanting to become self-directed and competent. This occurred not merely because, it was graded or it was gradeless or a hybrid gradeless environment, but simply due to multitude of other arrangements that was occurring within the course site itself, such as, the academic subjectivities of teachers and students, their ideological positionings, their meaningful relationships that they form, the emotional connections to people, the spaces that they lived in and learned in, the resources available within the classroom and outside of the classroom, but also, of course, the institutional and residential college environments also played a part. The second and a related significant finding is that the entangled and mutually influencing nature of assessment and teaching and learning practices. That is, the practices of assessment always occur in complex relationships with the different practices of learning and teaching in the different teaching and learning regimes, or what we call as TLRs, so that the gradeless, graded, and hybrid or the hybrid gradeless assessment produce different outcomes for learning and teaching, and for the learners and teachers as well when they are embedded within these different TLRs. Some authors writing on this topic seem to come to some version of the same conclusion, but rarely has it been demonstrated so clearly, like what I've done in my thesis, that assessment practice is intimately and deeply embedded and are inevitably entangled and entwined within the teaching and learning practices of a course site. There are 6 other findings that come out of my study, which I'm not going to talk about now, but you may read it from my thesis. Juggling the demands was indeed challenging, no doubt about it. Yeah. But what helped me in balancing to make it work was a little bit of planning and a little bit of discipline. To start with, what I did was I carved out 2 hours of dedicated time in the early mornings, usually from 5 o'clock in the morning to 7 a.m. to focus on my reading and writing every day. And over the weekends, probably I'll add a little bit of extra time. But even if it was just a short little paragraph, I made sure I wrote regularly. I followed this routine almost every day for the last 4 years, which was not easy. I also learned to be realistic with the limited amount of time I had. So on weekends and on some evenings, whenever possible, I really took long walks with my husband. I always ended my day catching up on my favorite Netflix shows before I go to bed. This relaxation and self-care was so important to me to get me more focused, re-energized, and productive. And also importantly is the communication with my supervisor was very crucial, especially since he was in a different time zone. So we agreed on a working structure that worked for both of us. Otherwise, it would have been a lot more difficult. And lastly, at this point, I should also mention my family whose support was so critical. And at times, they even became my reviewers who would spend time looking at my chapter drafts. The most rewarding time, of course, was me going into the classroom. That was really good, right? Going into these classrooms at these 9 different course sites, which was so diverse. The insights that I gained from observing each of these classes, the numerous conversations I had with those teachers as well as the students in those classes, both before and after the classes, and also the opportunity to interact with students, which I rarely get in my role as an educational developer. They were so rewarding and memorable. I could have simply stopped by, with observations for just a few classes. But I kept going. I almost went back to almost every one of their classes for the 13 weeks. That was really, really rewarding to me. These colleagues, of course, and students were so generous with their time, and it provided me with rich and detailed data. So what was challenging yet rewarding was the process of summarizing that rich data that I gathered. The way that I had to weave in and write the different stories, turning the complexities of the data and mapping them as ecologies of practice summary diagrams, which is a model that I kind of created from my research for each of these course sites. Of course, I can never forget the really exciting conversations and stimulating conversations that I had with my supervisor, Professor Paul Chawla. He's from the Lancaster University. Paul was incredibly generous. He was patient. He was super fast, of course, in providing me with feedback whenever needed for my drafts and in giving his guidance as well. He has been actually the best supervisor one could ever have. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to work with such an accomplished and really dedicated individual. First is the significant timely contribution to the contemporary knowledge about graded versus ungraded and hybrid gradeless assessment that can open up discussions on a very topical issue in assessment theory, in assessment policy, and assessment practice at NUS. The second one arising out of my research is also a model that I developed, which I talked about earlier, to illustrate the conceptualizations and enactments of practice-based knowing in the course sites. What this model does is that it maps the intended practices, that is what the teachers say, the experience practices, that is what the students say, and then the enacted practices, that is what as an observer I see, and then the set of significant TLR moments within that causa. Using this mapping from the model, one can easily develop a detailed yet descriptive narrative stories and explanatory insights into conceptualization and enactment of practice. And thus, for improving teaching and learning at NUS, this model can be easily used. It can be used as a tool for understanding educational practices in our university classrooms. Second, it can be used by our university leadership, both at the faculty level, departmental level, to comprehend and reimagine education. Third, it can be a tool for reflexive academic practitioners themselves, as a way to self-reflect and track teaching practices over time. At the same time, what they can also do is they can easily explore and learn from other people's or other colleagues' model mapping to critically reflect on the shared understandings and practices, and then they grow as a learning community. Finally, as academic developers, we can use it to initiate significant conversations with our colleagues, but it also form a platform to easily to share good practices with the larger teaching and learning community at